OK, I want to return to fuel loads tonight because what we've learned from Victorian authorities overnight is that there's been a drastic reduction in the number of hazard reduction burns recommended by the Black Saturday Royal Commission. Over the past 3 years, only 1/3 of the area earmarked for hazard reduction has been cleared. 1/3. This coincides, of course, with some of the worst drought conditions we've seen and now a devastating bushfire season. They are linked. Phil Cheney is a former CSIRO bushfire expert and he joins us from our Canberra studio right now. Phil, thank you for your time.
Hello, Chris.
Good to have you with us. The 2010 Royal Commission recommendations were very explicit on hazard reduction, weren't they?
They were. The expert committee recommended that 8% of the burnable country in Victoria should be treated. The Commission itself reduced this to 5%, and even the 5% hasn't been put into place. There have been excuses made and pseudo-science, in my opinion, to justify this. OK. DELP, which is the department that handles Victorian forests, they say they don't follow these guidelines anymore. They use a different strategy. What strategy is that? I understand it to be residual risk. And I was on a committee, I was asked to draft into a committee to work out residual risk, but I found that they wanted to operate under Chatham House rules, which means nobody was allowed to discuss that once they left the meeting. And that was unacceptable for me. It's not how science works, and so I didn't follow it through. So it's been an operation that's been produced in secret, and it doesn't work.
So this is not an intention to get rid of 5% of what should be reduced. It's actually pinpointing where the danger areas are and coming up with what, an indefinite or inconclusive number that need to have land clearing occur? Like, how the hell does this sort of stuff work?
Well, it doesn't. I mean, it's confusing two issues: risk, which is the chance of a fire starting, and threat, which is what the fire will do once it starts and burns up towards your asset or your home or whatever. Now, how to approach this is not a chance place, because we already know that the worst damage is going to occur in areas where the risk is lowest, because people aren't prepared, and if bad conditions occur only infrequently, then they will be caught out. What you have to do if you're concerned about protecting your assets and community is to work out what's going to be your worst likely conditions that you will ever face. And that means you take the bad, serious wind direction that'll bring a fire into your property, work out what the fuel load is in the path of that fire, and then work out what you have to do to protect it.
Gee, sounds like a lot of guesswork, the way it's being run now, and for 3 years they've been able to only get rid of 1/3 of what was recommended at the Royal Commission. In your mind, is this the work of ecological scientists? Like, who's changing the rules and not doing their job here?
It's the inevitable result of the governments abrogating their responsibility to managing public lands. And, you know, just to say that we have volunteers fighting fires on public land, it's not their job, and they can't do the management that is required. Now, you can't see this, probably, but this is a map of Western Victoria, and that is the prescribed burning program that is needed for an 8% applied across the countryside. Each colour represents 1 year of burn, and there's some 10 years there. Now, to do that, they require a rolling planning process which starts working on each block 7 years in advance.
No.
We don't have anything like that in Victoria. We don't have the expertise to apply it. We don't have the roads and trails that are necessary to do prescribed burning in a scientific and proper manner.
And I would have thought if you've not got proper fire trails and proper barriers, you are absolutely putting lives and property at risk come fire season. And when you consider that so much of this hazard reduction hasn't been done for decades, it's almost as if we've got to do much more than what, say, the Royal Commission prescribed we should be doing in Victoria to catch up.
It doesn't take that long if you have a trained professional force to put it in place. But we're starting so far behind the 8 ball that we haven't got that trained professional force in the field. Now, when we started introducing it in Western Australia after the 1961 wildfires that wiped out dwelling up in several towns, we started research into what was needed to predict accurately the behaviour of prescribed fires, and within 4 years that was put into place in Western Australia. We continued that on in the mountain country in New South Wales and the ACT, and started our first major burns in 1967. The burning program reached a peak about 1980, and then for a whole lot of reasons of government taking the responsibility away from forest operations where the management skills were, then the effort in being able to do prescribed burning has just waned away to almost nothing.
Would you agree the treatment, land management of fuel loads in, say, a national park is the single most important thing that leads to a fire or stops a fire spreading?
It's the only thing you can manage if you want to affect the fire, if you want to make fire suppression safer and easier. That's all we claim about prescribed burning. We don't say that it'll stop the fire. Yes, it'll stop it if it runs into a recent 1-year-old burn, but in other places, what it does, it makes it safer and easier.
Yeah.
But you need a whole lot of things. You need access, you need trails, you need manpower, you need people who are available at any time to go and get at the fires when they are small. If you haven't got those people, then, and you're relying on volunteers who do a fantastic job, but they're not available 24/7, and we shouldn't expect them to be.
I've spoken to a number of landholders and farmers this week and last week, Phil, and they all tell me the same thing about their own private property. They'd love to be removing fuel loads on their very large properties, but they are facing a lengthy green tape that they have to jump over before they can get permission to do so.
That is absolutely right. It's almost impossible. Some of these councils that have vegetation restriction orders where you can't even cut down trees, you can't thin out your shrubs. On Phillip Island, when I live, I needed to cut out a couple of trees around our house. The council wouldn't agree to that unless we agreed to plant another 20 trees. There wasn't room for another 20 trees, so clearing just couldn't be done.
It's ridiculous, and I've heard that story time and time again over the past 2 weeks as we've analysed some of the problems associated with leading to bushfires. It's almost as if we've created this attitude over the last 20 years where we're treating trees almost like humans.
I'm blowed if I know what they're treating them like, Chris, but there is no sense, because it seems that people can't set a priority on what they want to manage the land for. And that has to be part of proper land management. You set priorities, and that determines what sort of burn you will put in. It determines what you will burn to favour, if it's particular plants or particular animals. It can all be done, but it has to be worked out and planned.
Phil Cheney, I appreciate your great insight after so many decades of experience with the CSIRO. Thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure, Chris.
Okay.